views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hi, and welcome to Open BxRx Tuesday on BronxNet, a weekly program providing you the latest information, resources, services, and community efforts taking place locally here in the Bronx and virtually. I'm your host, Kibin, Alleyne. Coming up, several students across America are protesting racist school practices with book clubs. The New York Public Library joins me for discussion on the importance of exposing children to books about diversity. Is it crucial these books about race remain in schools? Then, in honor of Black History Month here on Open, we are highlighting work that supports Black historic figures. Lehman College professor and author joins me to discuss Booker T. Washington. Is Black history education missing in schools? After that, the Whole Health Report, sponsored by Empire BlueCross BlueShield, is back. We're joined by a registered nurse and a representative for the Food Bank for New York City to discuss food insecurity. How is food insecurity affecting residents in the Bronx? And researchers at the Children's Hospital at Montefiore are looking into the dangers of the consumption of high-powered magnets. What should a parent do if a child has consumed something poisonous or harmful? So please stick around. Open BxRx Tuesday starts now. Welcome to Open BxRx Tuesday on BronxNet. I'm your host, Kibin, Alleyne, and I'd like to invite you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter, and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. Several students across America are protesting racist school practices with the power of reading. After the ban of several Black books in schools, students formed book clubs in support of Black authors. Joining me for discussion on this is Associate Director for School Support and Outreach at the New York Public Library, Shauntee Burns-Simpson. Shauntee, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So can you tell me a little bit more about education within the NYPL and your role working with school support?
Sure. So NYPL has just started a new department called the Center for Educators in Schools. And we work directly with the school community, whether that be teachers, parents, students, to really let them know all of the amazing things that they have access to with their library card.
Now, as somebody who works with a library, what comes to mind when you hear that books just in general are being banned in schools, especially books in relation to history?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is silencing, because it's identities, stories, and perspectives that aren't allowed to be heard, which lays the groundwork for bullying, disrespect, violence, and attacks.
So, according to NBC, some of the books that have been banned include a book about Rosa Parks, Hidden Figures, a story about Black female mathematicians, and the documentary I Am Not Your Negro about the author and cultural critic James Baldwin. Why do you think these books are controversial in 2022?
These books shouldn't be controversial in 2022. These books can draw up curiosity in the reader that makes them question what they might have been told and urges them to learn more. And that's what we should want, because that's the learning process and can bring us together so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past.
How does this perpetuate racism within school education to ban these types of books relating to Black history?
It perpetrates racism because students are only hearing and learning one narrative, the white narrative, which sends a message to Black, Spanish, Asian, and Native that your story, your experience doesn't matter, which then sends a message to white students that whiteness is important and superior.
Now, I think this is super unfortunate that this is happening during Black History Month. Why is it crucial that these books remain available in schools, especially during this month?
I mean, these books need to be in schools for teaching and learning all year long, not just to be talked about and learned about in February, because I'm going to speak for myself and other Black people. We're not just Black in February, we're Black 365 days of the year.
Now, I think this is really interesting that we're seeing this happening predominantly in white schools, where Black children may already face challenges with their identity. How will the banning of these books further contribute to that?
Again, when students don't see themselves in the books, it sends the message that they don't belong or matter. So pulling these books off the shelves, that just confirms that message.
And how can, I guess, in general, books, because you work with the NYPL, how can books in general be a tool to strengthening the identities of young people and possibly even adults?
Uh, Books allow everyone to build on existing experiences and knowledge to learn. If one can't understand or relate to what they're learning, how will that information ever resonate? How can the person reading the story feel part of the history when, again, if they're not seeing themselves in it? So, books are that teaching tool to allow them to see and learn more about themselves as well as other people who are different from themselves.
And I like to learn a little bit more about your experience working with the NYPL. How have you seen, the presence of the New York Public Library strengthen schools within New York City and just strengthen education for kids in New York City?
Oh, that's such a great question. So, I will say that my team, specifically the school support and outreach team, it's about 8 outreach librarians that are going out into schools, and they're working very closely with educators as well as students. So we are providing workshops for parents so that they know how to engage with literacy with their child. We're working closely with educators so they're able to use NYPL's resources in their lesson planning and learning more titles, new diverse titles that they can incorporate in their lesson plans and in the classroom. And then again, we do amazing read alouds and book talks to students to get them really aware of these new titles by great authors, diverse authors, and get them excited about reading.
Now, I love that you brought up diverse authors. I think that for any child, it's important to kind of just read another experience different from your own. Now, of course, like the books that we mentioned earlier are important for Black children to read. But can you explain why it may also be important for non-Black children, that being Asian, Latino, whoever, to understand these stories as well?
It's important for all students to read diverse books. I mean, we all, not even just students, all of us to read diverse books because it encourages us to learn about our neighbor next door, down the block, around the corner, next state, in another country and around the world. This world is huge, and we have to prepare ourselves, our kids, to live, work, and grow alongside people who may not be the same race, religion, socioeconomic status. And stories help make that happen. And that's why books are extremely important.
So, upon my research, I found out that some non Black parents claim that the reason for banning these books was an effort to shield or protect their children from racism. Do you agree with this? And do you think it could actually be a little bit more harmful than good?
I mean, it's actually doing the opposite of what parents believe. Diverse characters and stories, they teach us empathy. It could be challenging for children of different backgrounds and races to understand and connect or care about each other. So often, non-Black students, they don't have the windows into the racism that their peers might be facing, and they don't see it. So if they don't see it, they can't learn from it or help stop it.
Black history and the Black experience can be heavy to handle, even for adults, so I can imagine the weight is a little bit heavier for children. How would you encourage Black parents, as well as others, to find the best ways to inform their kids about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Parents should read the book first so that they know if the content is age appropriate. So again, we're not going to give the autobiography of Malcolm X to a second grader. But if the subject matter is challenging, follow up with your librarian, your local librarian in the public library. If your school has a school librarian, that's fantastic, to get additional information as well as support in discussing some of the topics that are in some of the books.
Now, I really like to know a little bit more about what the NYPL is doing to celebrate diversity and celebrate Black History Month. You mentioned some workshops and books that you're reading. Can you tell us more about that?
Oh, absolutely. So if you go to nypl.org, you can see all of the amazing programs that we are offering across the system around Black History Month. I will like to highlight that we have the Schomburg's Black Liberation List. And we also have a very new list that's catered to educators and students and parents, and it's called Vibrant Voices. Again, this list is for kids, teens, and adults, so everyone can find a title. And this list is for authors of color. So we have Black, Indigenous, everyone part of this Vibrant Voices list. So if you are looking for a particular author, if you're just looking for new stories or welcoming stories or just stories that can just bring you in, help you learn, then that's absolutely a list that you should definitely check out. And all of that could be found at nypl.org.
Right. So is there another way that people can stay up to date with the NYPL? And I also want to highlight the Schomburg Center a little bit since it is Black History Month. How can people learn a little bit more if they're looking for more Black education?
Oh, yes, the Schomburg Center is amazing, and they do a lot of work with educators and the community as well. And so, yes, you could also get to the Schomburg from nypl.org. If there's any questions, you can always email school support at nypl.org, as well as CES at nypl.org, and that's part of the Center for Educators in Schools, which is part of school support and outreach. We're part of that department team.
Amazing. Shauntee, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much. Have a great one.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday.
We know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scales of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting to the new reality.
Reporting from BronxNet, this is Trans.
We built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at BronxNet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
to the world.
BronxNet.
Welcome back. In honor of Black History Month, here on Open, we are highlighting work that further supports and analyzes the contributions of Black historical figures. Recognizing Black History Month, professor at Lehman College, Dr. Mark Christian, explores the work of a Black American educator through his latest book, Booker T. Washington, A Life in American History. Dr. Christian, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So can you tell me a little bit about your background and how it actually put you on the path towards exploring African American history through books?
Yes, I'm originally from Liverpool, England. My father is of Jamaican heritage. My mother was Spanish and British citizen of Spanish heritage. And they had 13 children and I'm number 12. So I come from a very large family. And we are a musical family also. I used to sing with my brothers a cappella. So we were pretty good at singing. We copied the Persuasions, New York a cappella band. And when you follow them, you follow African American history in a broader, deeper sense. So I grew up in a very Black British background, within the context of learning Black American music. That led me to a greater interest in African American culture and history. Last thing, my grandfather actually worked with Marcus Garvey. His name was George Rupert Christian. And my grandparents from Jamaica migrated to Columbus, Ohio. And they're actually buried in Columbus, Ohio in Green Lawn Cemetery.
Wow, that's really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's really cool how we could be from so many different parts of the world, but can be connected through history. So again, thank you for sharing that. Now, speaking of history, for those who aren't familiar, can you give us a brief overview of Booker T. Washington's work?
Well, Booker T. Washington was born in enslavement. I have to do this short because of our time. Yeah, he was born during enslavement in 1856. After he spent his first 9 years of his life under enslavement, and then the family moved, cut a long story short, to Malden in West Virginia. Booker was a very precocious child and had a love of learning. And his mother, although a single mother, and by the way, his father was likely a local white from another plantation area where he was when he was born. That's what biographers have so far found out. Booker struggled for his education tremendously and made a 500-mile trek to a place now it's called Hampton University, but it was Hampton Institute at the time. And there he was disheveled, poverty-ridden. And they welcomed him in, but he worked as a janitor to pay for his studies. And his mentor was General Samuel Chapman Armstrong. He writes about all of this in his autobiography called Up From Slavery. And to cut a long story short, Booker T. Washington was quite brilliant as a student and became a teacher himself. And this is the part where he becomes really famous is when he takes over, builds up Tuskegee Institute. But the men, I would say the man behind Tuskegee is often forgotten. His name was Lewis Adams, and he was born in 1842. And he was born into enslavement in Tuskegee. And a great skilled artisan and in harnessing and shoemaking and tinsmith. So Lewis Adams often gets lost in the Booker T. Washington story. So I really had to highlight his contribution. Booker T. built up Tuskegee. There was $2,000 for teacher salaries, but there was no buildings. So it was the community that come together. He lived among the community. It was Lewis Adams who put him up when he came from West Virginia to settle in Tuskegee. So he started in very humble conditions. The land on Tuskegee was formerly a plantation. And he got it together to buy that for $500. And he raised most of the money himself through fundraising. He was a brilliant fundraiser. So to cut a long story short, he built up an institution. He's an institution builder and a man who had he was very practical in terms of what did African Americans need at that time. And it was jobs and skills in order to survive, you see. So he was very much into industrial vocational work, but there was always liberal arts, and that's what gets lost as well.
So I'm really glad that you pointed that out, because during my research, I understand that this was actually quite a controversial opinion to have back in that time. You know, even knowing that it was quite controversial, was there something you felt people weren't seeing in him? Why did you want to highlight that?
Could you say, why do you think it was controversial?
Of course. Yeah. Why do you think it was why do you think his work was considered controversial?
Well, because he's been fossilized in historical interpretation. Most of those writing on Booker T. Washington come out of the W.E.B. Du Bois school of thought. And so they tend to underplay his role in terms of liberal arts. And Booker T, in an essay in The Souls of Black Folk, of Mr. Booker T. Washington and others, it's there in that context that we see the fossilization of Booker T. Washington. But scholars like Ishmael Reed and Harold Cruz have often set the record straight that Booker T. Washington was for industrial and vocational education, because that's what the people needed in his area. That's what African Americans needed for and foremost at that time. However, there was never a disinterest in higher education. Booker T. Washington was a trustee at Howard University and Fisk University. He funneled funds into both of those universities from philanthropic contributions from northern rich folks. So the fossilization comes from a set of scholars that were able to cement his legacy, and he couldn't answer back because he died in 1915 and Du Bois lived on for another 50 years. So it's a very unbalanced interpretation. It's like somebody criticizing you and you can't answer back. It's very, very difficult, you know. And and he was in that scenario. There's another controversy which catapulted him into the national spotlight, and that was the 1895 speech he gave at the Atlanta Exposition, September the 18th, 1895. And he says a lot of things in this speech, but one of the crucial things that come out is in all things purely social, we can be as separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand in all things essential to mutual progress. Now that 27 words also gets fossilized, and he's supposedly then given up voting rights. He's given up, he's surrendered to segregation, and he's not interested in higher education. This is the problem, I think, that young scholars need to get over. It's that hill, it's that fossilization of Booker T. Washington, which I think is very unfair, you know.
So I'm so happy that we're actually having this discussion, and I'm happy that your book is being discussed, especially during an important time like Black History Month, because I think that a lot of people are having an interest and are eager to learn more about Black history. Can you explain why you think that we're seeing this shift lately, if at all?
Well, I believe, from what I can understand from the woke generation, is that this is in relation to Breonna Taylor. I would say particularly George Floyd, the murder, the horrendous visual murder of George Floyd, did send waves of moral interest in trying to improve the situation of African Americans and people of African heritage across the globe. Whether that sustains itself, I'm not sure. I've been woke for 40 odd years, and in Black history and culture, we're always struggling to establish ourselves. So it's nice to have this 15 minutes of popularity, if you like. Whether it sustains itself for a long term, we will see. But I'm happy about the young people being interested in Black history and culture. And by the way, because gender is a big issue right now, I would say for young people, if you want to see an equivalent to Booker T. Washington, study Mary McLeod Bethune, because Mary McLeod Bethune also built her own institution and was an advisor to presidents like Booker T. Washington was. The critique of them is that they were in the hands of white people. And I think that's a very superficial critique, because Booker T. Washington, all the funds that he raised either went to Black education, higher and elementary, and building up schools in the South. So it's very easy from the North to criticize somebody who walks gingerly through politics, because this was a very dangerous time for any African American to speak his mind. There are politicians today trying to stop us talking about this kind of history. Now you have to ask yourself.
So sorry, we're really running out of time, but I definitely want to make sure that everyone can definitely know where they can go to find this book. So can you just quickly direct them to where they can actually learn more about this?
Oh, the book itself can be purchased anywhere. You just mark Christian Booker T. Washington, and it will come up in numerous places: Barnes and Noble, Amazon, and the publisher itself, ABC Clio. I think young people will be inspired of all cultures, but particularly African American and people of African heritage globally, should be looking into Booker T. Washington with a fresh eyes and hopefully fresh mind, and try and stay away from the stereotypes of people because they're very dangerous.
Doctor, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate having this conversation. We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us here on Open BxRx Tuesday. This week, the Whole Health Report, sponsored by Empire Blue Cross Blue Shield, is back. Today, we are welcoming back Laura Brosen, a registered nurse, and we're joined by Melissa Pino, a food bank for New York City, to discuss food insecurity. Thank you both for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
So we're going to jump right into it. Can you just explain what is food insecurity and how is it affecting residents of the Bronx?
Sure. So food insecurity is the lack of sufficient and nutritious food enough to feed the entire household. And that can happen for a variety of reasons. It could be unemployment, underemployment, or the lack of access to food because of the community of where the people are living and the resources in the area, or because of what happened during COVID, so that programs weren't available, or because of people receiving things through resources that weren't open. So community programs that weren't able to operate, or schools where children were receiving school lunch programs weren't operating. And even before the pandemic, the numbers that you showed, we were seeing that children, about 85,000 children were going hungry, but that climbed in 2020 up to about 125,000. So it's only getting worse. The pandemic just amplified what we were seeing.
And can you just reiterate how it's affecting residents of the Bronx?
Sure. So, in the Bronx, which the Bronx, as we know, is one of the most unhealthy counties in New York City, where there's chronic conditions, diabetes and heart disease and other things, where in an urban area and there's not as much access to fresh produce and healthy, healthy food, it just is, exacerbated even more.
Thank you so much for that. Now, Melissa, can you tell us a little bit about the food bank, how it works, and what is it doing to get Bronxites and nutritious food that they need?
Sure. So Food Bank New York City receives monetary donations, but also work with local and federal governments to fund operations and food distributions. I've been with Food Bank for New York City for 12 years now, and I've specifically worked with members in the Bronx. I now currently serve as the Senior Manager of Mobile Pantry, and our Mobile Pantry program is a consistent and dependable monthly distribution, bringing shelf-stable products, fresh seasonal produce, and frozen protein to high-need areas throughout New York City.
Laura, what are the implications of food insecurity from a health perspective?
So I'm so glad that you asked that. We talk a lot about whole health, and when you consider the members' whole health, you think about their mental health, how stress can be impacted for chronic conditions such as high blood pressure and diabetes. Food is medicine. Food really is medicine. So if you have diabetes and you don't have access to fresh produce and lean proteins and things that can keep your glucose under control, you're really reaching for things that are low cost and shelf stable, as Melissa just spoke to. Some things like, pasta and canned goods, which can be high in salt and high in carbohydrate, then you're going to make your chronic conditions worse and you're going to become less healthy. So when you think about, not having enough to eat and the stress that can cause, so mental health, the whole health of the person, asthma exacerbation, and in the Bronx, put all that together, and that's the implications of food insecurity on a family.
Wow, that's a lot. So thank you so much for sharing that. Melissa, I'm sure COVID must have impacted the food bank. Can you tell us a bit about that? And what were some issues or obstacles your organization was facing during that time?
Sure. So before COVID-19, nearly 236,000 Bronx residents, or 16.5% of the population, were already food insecure. So the number of our neighbors in the Bronx who are food insecure is now close to 36% due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And some of the obstacles that we have been facing, as we hear it in the news all the time, the supply chain challenges. We're also being affected by that as well. We've had to modify our orders. We've had to modify our vendors to ensure we have access to the products that we need.
Sorry. No, you can go. You can continue.
Sorry. Additionally, the cost of food is rising. So families that purchase food need to stay healthy. A recent example that we heard from a client, and actually from Parkside in the Bronx, shared the same bag of couscous that we were providing cost him $10 in his grocery store. So just the cost of everything is increasing.
I really love that you mentioned that because I think that is something that many people have noticed, and it's only made food insecurity even more of a challenge for people who are already struggling to afford healthy food. The fact that it costs more, I can only imagine how much more challenging that is. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'd really like to know, how has COVID impacted the way you and your agency distribute food?
Yeah, so some of our partners have increased their days and hours. Some members have even allotted a specific distribution time for seniors, since we know our seniors are more susceptible to COVID. So many member agencies have sprang into action and are committed to expand their days and hours to provide those services that our clients are looking for.
Now, I'd like to hear it from both of you. Can you just explain what resources are out there for our viewers?
Sure. I'll jump in first. I know that Melissa's going to have so many great resources to share as well. I think that New York City does a great job of providing some resources. So if you go to nyc.gov, 311, you can call 311, or on nyc.gov, you can look at the resources there. There's also, talk to your doctor. If you're having difficulty, they might know about programs in your area. They're a great resource. Go to your community centers, maybe through your church or your faith-based center if you're part of one, and you might find some resources. If you have health insurance, talk to your health insurer. Call the number on the back of the card. Go to the website. There's programs available. I know that at Empire, BlueCross, and BlueShield that we have programs. Visit our website. And those are some of the things that we have available. Melissa, I'll let you speak to the things at the food pantry. I know at the food bank, I know you have things too.
Sure, thank you. So Food Bank for New York City offers additional services, and we actually have our member networks that also participate in providing additional services, such as food stamps, taxes. We are in tax season. We have a program for free taxes for anyone living in New York City, and that just is, to help reduce the cost. Getting your taxes done for free ensures that you're able to put more money towards purchasing food or paying bills. And you can find all of our programmings on our food bank website, foodbanknewyorkcity.org.
All right. Thank you both so much for joining me. We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday.
If you're struggling to afford your internet bills during the pandemic, there's a temporary government program that may be able to help. It's called the Emergency Broadband Benefit, and it provides up to $50 monthly discount on your broadband bill to qualifying households. Find more information about the program, including if you qualify and how to enroll, at fcc.gov/broadbandbenefit, or call toll-free at 833-511-0311. That's 833-511-0311.
know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scales of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting to the new reality.
Reporting from BxRx, this is Shauntee.
Welcome back. Researchers at the Children's Hospital at Montefiore are looking into the dangers of high-powered magnets and the effect they have on children. Joining me for discussion on this research and possible solutions is Pediatric Gastroenterologist Dr. Novak. Doctor, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. I'm very happy to talk to you about this very important subject.
Now, as part of the Children's Hospital at Montefiore, you led a study looking closely at how high-powered magnets are affecting the health of very young children. To better understand this, can you explain what high-powered magnets are and how harmful they are to children?
Sure. So they're very strong magnets. They're actually much stronger than typical refrigerator magnets. And high-power magnet toys are composed of multiple small round balls or squares. They're often shiny, brightly colored, and they come in packages of 100 or more and are marketed as desk toys. So they're very innocent looking objects, but they actually have been found to be very dangerous to children. So as a pediatric gastroenterologist, I learned very early on that children will eat just about anything. And luckily, most objects pass through the GI tract without any issues. However, when these magnets are consumed, they attract each other and they get stuck together inside the intestine, causing a lot of harm. They can make holes, they can cause bleeding, there could be leaking of intestinal contents, causing infection. They have caused blockages in the intestine. They've required surgeries and other procedures to remove them or fix the problems that were caused by them. And so they've even caused death.
Wow. So thank you so much for sharing that. I understand that this risk factor was reintroduced following a change in the U.S. market by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So when these products first appeared on the market in 2008, we started seeing a rise in injuries from these magnets in children. And because of the concerns, the Consumer Product Safety Commission took action, and these products were removed from the market in 2012 and almost gone by 2014. However, one company went to court, and this decision was overturned, allowing these products to return back to the market in 2016. So since 2016, we again saw the rise in these very scary injuries in children.
Now, can you explain some of the details of the study that you led? What were some of the variables or factors you observed?
So we gathered information from multiple hospitals all around US, and what we found is more than half of the children that had an exposure to a magnet required hospitalization, and almost half required invasive procedures like endoscopy or surgery to remove these magnets or for the treatment of the complications that they caused. Nearly 1 in 10 kids had a life-threatening injury such as bowel obstruction, a hole in the bowel called perforation, or bleeding.
Now, I understand the research found 95% of children were exposed, and they were under the age of 14 years old. Can you further explain why we saw that specific number?
So under current law, high power magnet sets can be marketed to adults over age 14. Now, in our study, we found that 95% of the children were younger than 14. Of those exposed to the magnets were younger children.
Now, what was the outcome in regards to hospitalization and the health of these children? I know you touched on it a little bit. Can you further explain what some of these families were probably seeing?
So what we saw is that more than half of the children that came to the emergency room or required assistance regarding these ingestions were hospitalized, and almost half required procedures to remove these magnets. Like I said, we saw very serious complications like bleeding, infections. They required surgery. Some children required more than one procedure to either treat the complication or remove the magnets.
So I'm really curious to understand or to know, besides being hospitalized, how else did these magnets affect the children? Was there developmental delays as well?
So what we found was that children with developmental delays are at a much higher risk of injury from these magnets, 3 times the risk actually. So they and children under 2 were most highly affected, and they are most vulnerable because I think these patients are unable to explain what happened and often have difficulties communicating their symptoms. So there probably is a delay in treating and finding these magnets. They're tiny and they're difficult, they're difficult for families to track.
Now, I think over time, we've all heard stories of children consuming random items that they probably shouldn't. You kind of mentioned that just in your profession, you see that happen all the time. I think this would be a really great time to highlight poison prevention while informing caregivers on what they can do. Can you speak on this?
Yeah, so absolutely. These are very dangerous objects, and the best treatment for these is prevention. To not have them in their homes, to not allow your kids to play with them. If you have friends that have them, I would tell them to get rid of it, because really, once they're ingested, they can cause a lot of harm, and they're very difficult, to remove. So I would say the best thing is to just not have these toys. They need to be removed.
And I'm also really curious to know, I think most children's toys have age requirements or like age limits. Is that something that you found as well that kind of informs parents of like what age a child should be exposed to a certain type of toy?
So again, they are only allowed to market these products to adults, which are not really adults, 14 and older. However, children are drawn to them. They're shiny, they're colorful, and because there are hundreds of them, it's impossible to know if you're missing a few. So I think toddlers are at a high risk and older children are at a risk because they pretend that they are piercings and they play with them.
Yes, as I can definitely attest to that. Now, what should a parent do if a child has consumed something that was poisonous or harmful? Like, what are the next steps?
So obviously you can contact your physician. There are poison control centers that are very knowledgeable about this. And then if needed, you do go to the emergency room. I think there's a high risk object, so that you need to be very careful.
Oh, do you know any other objects that are high risk?
Sure, button batteries, cleaning solutions. We see a lot of injuries from those.
Now, following the results of the study, I understand there are now efforts to get these high-powered magnets out of the hands of young children. Can you tell me more about this effort?
Sure, because we were seeing, again, a rise in these injuries over the last few years, the Consumer Product Safety Commission again took action and proposed another rule to try to prevent these items from entering the market. And it would be great to have support for this action. The public can weigh in by going on their website and showing support.
And can you tell me a little bit more about what researchers are doing to raise awareness and educate families about this?
So we're trying the best we can to educate by doing programs like this, by speaking to the news, by publishing articles. The American Academy of Pediatrics has been very vocal. My colleague, Dr. Brian Rudolph, who's the lead author on the study, has spent a lot of time educating pediatricians and the public about dangers of these items. And we continue to work hard. They're really dangerous. They need to be off the shelves and not in people's homes.
And then can you just tell me a little bit about your own personal experience working with children and trying to ensure that they stay safe and away from items like this?
So when speaking to parents, especially parents of younger children, I would always mention things to avoid. And I've always very strongly encouraged people who have these items to throw them out, to tell their family members to throw these out, because injuries happen frequently and they cause a lot of harm. They cause very serious complications.
And then can you tell us what actually got you interested in this study and in this field of work in general?
Well, I think that there was data that was needed to support regulatory action against these companies. Actually, since we published the study, I've had surgeons and other pediatricians reach out to me with stories that they had of kids that were sick, and they were very happy that we're doing this.
Amazing. Now, can you just let everybody know how they can stay up to date with the Children's Hospital at Montefiore?
Sure. You can follow us on cham.org, and you can follow us on Twitter at Montefiore Peds.
Doctor, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
That's all for our show today. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Kibin, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.